Why did I buy these patterns? What on earth was I thinking? Hi, my name is Sarah, and welcome to my channel, which is all about sewing and styling a handmade wardrobe. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you the pattern purchases that I regret the most. Now, I'm not saying that these are bad patterns, although the last one I'm going to share with you actually definitely is a bad pattern. But for the most part, this isn't actually about the pattern quality, it's just about my decision-making process and where I went wrong along the way. So my purpose in creating this video is to have a little fun and share with you some silly mistakes that I made with pattern purchases, and to talk you through some of my reasoning in the hopes that I can help you prevent making some of the mistakes that I made. So let's just get started. The first pattern that I regret purchasing is a vintage pattern. It's Vogue 1940, and it's for this absolutely beautiful jersey evening dress. Now this mistake was just pure nostalgia. Back in 1996, my mom agreed to make me my prom dress. So we went to Hancock Fabrics and we're looking through the pattern books, and I stopped on this pattern because I just thought it was breathtakingly beautiful. But at the time, as a 16-year-old, I don't think I had the body confidence to pull off that kind of dress. And even now, as a 43-year-old, I'm still not sure that I would have that confidence. But I always remembered that pattern and just thought it was so incredibly lovely. So a couple of years ago, I was browsing on eBay and Etsy for vintage patterns like you do, and maybe even some Facebook destash groups, because I can't actually find my receipt for this pattern, so I'm thinking I may have bought it in a destash. But at any rate, I know that I stumbled upon this pattern again, and those memories came flooding back, and without thinking any further, I just plunked down some money and purchased the pattern. Now, because I can't find my receipt, I don't know exactly how much I paid for it, but judging for what this pattern goes for today, I'm gonna guess that I paid somewhere between $20 and $30 for this pattern, so it was not cheap. Now, the reason that this was such a mistake and I regret buying it is because I have no occasion to wear this dress to. And I even think that I might be able to pull it off pretty well with the aid of strategically placed sticky boobs. But the main thing is I just don't have anywhere to wear a dress like this. I don't think that it would be really appropriate for a wedding. It's a little bit too risque. I don't get invited to fancy parties or galas or opening events. I definitely wouldn't make it for a holiday party because I would freeze to death. So unless I just wanted to make up this dress and just chill around the house in it just because, I'm never gonna make this dress. It's completely pointless. I should have left it in 1996 where it belongs. So the reality is I should probably destash this pattern myself and let someone who's actually going to make it have it, because I know that I'm just never gonna reach for it. But I do still think that it is an absolutely stunning dress. It's just not for my lifestyle. The second pattern that I regret purchasing is actually an entire book. It's the Breaking the Pattern book by the people behind Named Clothing. I bought this off of Amazon for about $27 a couple of years ago. Now, I don't think that this is a bad book, and I think that it has some lovely patterns, but a couple of issues come into play for me that make the purchase a regret. First of all, now that I really think about it, even though I think that the patterns are beautiful and they have some really unique details, most of them just aren't really my style. But really, the main issue that I have with this book, and with Named Clothing in particular, is that they draft for a taller person, and I'm 4'9". So I did make one pattern of the book in a couple of different versions. I made a turtleneck pullover, and then I also made that same pattern but as a dress. And the proportions were just all wrong on me. I really needed to make a ton of adjustments. And so I don't have either of those pieces in my wardrobe anymore because they just didn't fit right. And for me, I just don't like the design of the patterns enough to want to put in the work to get them to fit me. So that's why I stay away from Named Clothing. Again, I don't think that they're a bad company. I just don't think that they're a very good starting point for my particular body shape. So I do kind of wish that I had saved my money and not purchased this book. By the way, I will be linking all of these patterns down in the description box, so in case you want to make the mistake of buying them too, you can. The third pattern on my list that I regret buying is the Itch to Stitch Mountain View jeans pattern. I paid $12 for this pattern, and I did actually sew it up one time. Now, this was totally one of those things where I got swept up by the sewing community. So many people had raved about this pattern and just absolutely loved them. And I think at the time I was kind of experiencing some weight fluctuations, and I was like, maybe the pull-on jeans thing will work for me. So I bought the pattern and I made them up right away, and I absolutely hated them. Some of that was my own fault. I don't like things to sit mid-rise or low-rise on me. I only like high-rise pants. So I had extended the rise to make it sit higher, but that meant that the elastic waist was like cutting into my waist all the time, and it was super uncomfortable. So then I tried to go back in and fix it by lowering the waistband and making it a mid-rise again. But I ended up doing it too much, and then they were low rise, which resulted in some really unfortunate plumber butt moments. Talk about a wardrobe malfunction. So that was just a no-go, and I ended up getting rid of those pants. And what I really should have done is taken a step back and thought about it. I have never been a pull-on jeans person. It's just not me. I like wearing belts with my jeans almost all of the time, and that elastic waist just looks kind of funny even if I were to put belt loops on it. You would see that wide waistband and then there would just be a belt kind of floating on it. I know that a lot of people love the pull-on jeans, but they are just not my style. So I don't think there's issues with the pattern. I actually think it was drafted really well, and I do really like the leg shape, but pull-on jeans just aren't for me, and I knew that going in. I just ignored the little voice in my head telling me that this was a bad idea. So that's why that purchase was a regret. This next regret is another impulse purchase. This is the Nina Lee spring dress, and at the time that I bought this, it was only available as a paper pattern in a British sewing magazine. So this pattern had kind of taken the sewing community by storm, and I'd seen so many versions of it. And in fact, because I'm in America and I couldn't get my hands on the pattern, I ended up hacking a pattern that I already own. I took the Love Notions Rhapsody pattern and I made a dress that looks very similar to this one. And I'll put up a picture here so you can see what that looks like. So I had already made my knockoff version of the dress before I even bought this one. So I happened to be in Joann's one day, and I'm just browsing, and I happened to see in their magazine section that they had a copy of this magazine that had this pattern in it. And impulse just took over, and I remembered how much I wanted that pattern so badly, not even thinking that I had already made the dress that I wanted to make. So I just went ahead and bought the pattern. I think the magazine and everything that came with it was about $14. And as you can see, I've never opened this because I already made this dress. I don't really need to make another one. To rub even more salt in the wound, this pattern is actually available as a PDF download on Etsy. I think if I had just waited a few months and I still really wanted to get this pattern, I could have just saved myself some money and got the PDF download. So this is another one that I should probably destash because I know I'm never going to make this, even though I think that it's a pretty dress. I already own several tiered dresses, and right now I just don't think that I need to add any more. So I really should have thought twice before buying this pattern because I knew deep down that I was never going to make it. Number 5 on my list is another influenced pattern. This one is Vogue 8577, and it didn't cost a ton of money. I believe I bought it on sale for $5.99. And this is for a very vintage inspired shirt dress. I think I had seen Sean from Kittenish Behavior make this dress, and maybe several of them, and they all look fabulous on her. But I need to remember that Sean is very tall and very curvy, and I'm basically the opposite shape of her. And most importantly, the fabric recommendations for this dress, if you want to make the long one, it's fully lined. So in total, you need about 10 yards of fabric. 10 yards! I can't imagine making a dress that has 10 yards of fabric. I just feel like I would be completely drowned in it. I think that if you are taller, you can carry off that sort of weight, but on my 4'9" frame, I just feel like it would drag me down. So I definitely am never going to make this pattern, and now that I think about it, I think what I really liked about it in the first place was this version that has this little fold back collar. I do like that detail, and I actually did make the Jennifer Lauren handmade Sorel dress, which has that type of collar, but it's a much more toned down, minimal sort of dress. I think that it suits me way better than this one would. So I absolutely should have left this one in the drawer. I know that I'm never going to make it. Part of me kind of wants to try someone else's version of this dress on just to see what it would feel like to walk around in 10 yards of fabric. But I'm definitely not going to take the time and money to do it myself because I know that I would never wear it. Now, number 6 on my biggest pattern purchasing regrets list was only $2. So you might be asking the screen right now, Sarah, why are you complaining about a pattern that only cost you $2? Well, I will tell you. Well, it's because it is perhaps the worst pattern I have ever made. Now, I debated a lot whether I should even bring this up on the channel because the person who designed the pattern is clearly not a professional, but here's the thing. I feel like when you put out a pattern for sale, whether you're charging $2 or $10 or $20, you should have some level of professionalism, and the person who buys your pattern should be able to sew up the pattern using your drafted pattern and your instructions. And if you can't do that, then I don't think that you should be charging money for it. So because I'm not really trying to pile on to this designer or this company, I'm gonna just stick to the facts. So the pattern is called Christy Stitches Dog Hoodie. I got it on sale at the Makerist for $2. The regular price is $5, and it is essentially pajamas for your pit bull. So my dog Penny is at least part pit bull. She has very short fur and she doesn't have a lot of fur on her underbelly, so she gets cold really easily. So I do like to make her some jammies for the wintertime just so she can stay nice and warm. And the designer for this pattern, in her description, she said that she used to make these for pit bull rescues. So she just put out the pattern for sale so that anyone could make jammies for their pit bull if they wanted to. So when I saw the pattern for sale, I was like, hey, $2, I'll go ahead and buy it and make it up and see how it works. So here are just some of the things that I found that were wrong with the pattern. First of all, the tile pattern doesn't have any sort of markings where you can line up the pages, and it also didn't print out all of the lines. So it was a little bit of guesswork when I was taping it together to try to get it into the right position, and then some of the lines weren't there, so I had to physically draw them in myself. The pattern for the hood is actually on a separate file. So when I printed that one out and taped it together, it actually had two sizes on it. It had a large and an extra large, but the pattern for the main part of the pajamas only comes in one size. I do think that if you were a beginner, that might be pretty confusing. Not all of the pattern pieces were marked indicating how many you should cut. So you know, like your typical like back cut 1 on fold, sleeves cut 2, they weren't all marked in that way. So again, if you were a beginner, I think that that could be really confusing. Also, there's a pattern piece for a neckband and also the pattern for the hood. You obviously only need one or the other. The instructions don't really make it that clear that you're choosing between the hood or the neckband. So I would imagine if you weren't familiar with sewing knits that you might cut out both and then be confused about how you're supposed to put them together. Now, one of the main things that drove me absolutely crazy is that nowhere on the pattern file itself or in the instructions does it tell you what the seam allowance is. And because the pattern wasn't professionally drafted, where sometimes you can tell what the seam allowance is because when the edges are trued up, you can measure that and say, oh, it's 3/8 or 1/2 inch or whatever. But this pattern didn't have that. So there was absolutely no way to indicate what the seam allowances were meant to be. So I went to the designer's website, and it actually says the seam allowances are 3/8 to 1/2 of an inch. And then the Makerist website says that the seam allowances are 1/4 inch. So WTF, what is it? Does the 3/8 to 1/2 inch mean that some parts are 3/8 and some parts are 1/2, or you can pick whichever one that you want depending on the stretch of your fabric? I don't know. I think I ended up doing 1/2 inch seam allowances because I was using a stretchy French terry, whereas the original was drafted for like a polar fleece that doesn't have a lot of stretch. But again, if you were a beginner, you wouldn't know what seam allowance to pick. And the fact that it's not in the instructions or on the pattern itself anywhere is just not a good idea. So as I had all of these issues putting the pattern together and trying to figure these things out, I thought to myself, before I cut up my fabric, I should walk the seam allowances to make sure that they all match. So it is a really good thing that I did that because the back piece was 3 inches longer than the front piece. The side seams did not match up. Now the only thing that I can think of is that maybe you're supposed to stretch the front to fit the back, but 3 inches is way too much to be trying to do that. So I do think that that was probably an error. I ended up cutting it at the length and shorten line and shortening the back piece 3 inches so that it would match the front. But that was another major issue that if you were a beginner, I don't think that you could put this pattern together. Now, admittedly, I don't have a lot to say about the instructions because I didn't really look at them. With the initial issues that I had, I was like, I don't even know if I want to look at these instructions, so I just put it together in the logical way that made sense to me. And I will say that the end product turned out okay. It doesn't fit the best, but it is dog jammies, so honestly, who really cares? They do look absolutely adorable. But the reason why I keep harping on I don't think that a beginner would be able to figure this out is because I do think that it is possible that someone who has never sewn before in their life, but who loves their pit bull, might see this pattern and think, hey, it's only $2, I'll buy this pattern to make it for my pit bull because she needs jammies. And then they would probably give up in frustration because they're not able to successfully sew the pattern. So that's why I feel like this pattern deserves criticism, even though this designer is obviously not trying to make a living from it, and she clearly says that she's not a professional. And if she had put out her pattern for free and had those warnings that like, hey, I'm not a professional, then I think that I would be more prepared and think to myself, it is more of a you get what you pay for sort of situation. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear to say that I will not be recommending this pattern. And as far as making it again, I probably won't. I have kind of ironed out most of the issues now, and so I think I could make multiples if I really wanted to, but I had just such a bad experience with it that I think I would rather just try something else. So in case you just can't get enough of me ranting about bad patterns, watch this one next.